one of our speakers on November 14th for Building Power. So come back for that to hear more from Marlene. Okay, so I finally get to introduce our first speaker tonight. Faiz Abhuani is the founder and director of Brique by Brique, which is a nonprofit and community hub that was created in Park X as a way to address communities' needs and desire for affordable housing. Faiz brings with him a background in international cooperation and real estate and has decades worth of experience working with communities. He has cooperated and collaborated with many organizations around Montreal on issues of housing and decommodification, and must be one of the most connected people in the city from what I have heard. And we are really excited to have Faiz with us today to talk more about his work and how we can organize collectively for a better future. So let's welcome Faiz.
One of the most connected people. That's a great reputation to have. Look, it's a small group, so I will take the liberty. I'll take the liberty of trying to facilitate a bit of an informal thing, you know. But I imagine that people won't know who the hell I am. So I grew up on Van Horn, Outremont represent. But I moved around a lot because of all kinds of different factors in my life and community and stuff like that. Not because my parents were diplomats, although I would have liked that. And so I was able to see how different people live in different parts of town and different towns and different countries and all that kind of thing. Always basically in different low-income neighborhoods. And so they all had their flavor, but they also had something in common, which was just a lot of movement, a lot of, I guess you would, if you want to say it negatively, you would say instability, housing instability. And so the base camp was 1206 Van Horn, because my grandparents lived on the second floor. It was owned by the folks who operated the furniture store based on the ground floor. And my auntie was on the third floor. And so because of all the instability with my mom, I would often end up there. And so our whole community, so I'm an Ismaili from East Africa. So yeah. Oh, because you can't see me?
The online folks can't see you. You want to see the online?
Shit, there's online people. They're gonna have me on my back, right?
Yeah, they're like behind you.
Oh.
You can't see your face.
I think it's
Okay, it doesn't matter.
just go where you're.
Yeah, hybrid, mybrid, you know. So what was I saying? Yeah, so we had immigrated, and at the time, Montreal was following the urban development pattern that most North American cities followed after the Second World War, which is the donut. So the center of the city kind of got impoverished, and there came new developments in the periphery. Brossard, Longueuil blew up, Saint-Lambert, all that jazz. This whole South Shore expanded. Laval went from being like farmland to being like just suburban, American suburban style. So when they came in, that was the reality. So what's known as Myland now was a fairly low income, diverse neighborhood, super dynamic, but they wanted to get the hell out of there. So those who could get out because they were able to like pool their resources, ended up moving to the suburbs. And those who couldn't, well, they stayed as long as they could. And then my family was the last family to be evicted. The mosque was across the street, that got dislocated. And then when that moved to TMR, a lot of people also moved out. And because the mosque was next to the highway, people just lived all over. And so the feeling of a community and the feeling of like having a place where you can. It was just so. It was it was just so nice to be able to go to mosque and run around and have this sense of like joy. Um, it was in stark contrast to school, which was you sit and you listen, and if someone, says something mean to you or beats you up or something, and you go complain to the teacher's response would be like, en français, you know? So it was a very different vibe. And so that's like my lived experience around gentrification. That's not why I became a housing guy. I became a housing guy for other reasons that I'm not going to get into. I don't want to get into my psychology, but basically in college, I was like, let's change the world. And I think when you're in college, there's a lot of people who like have this feeling of like, well, there's a problem with the world and we need to do something about it. And people will go from like one issue to the next. Sometimes they'll want to focus on issues that are very close to them personally. Sometimes they'll be so like taken by a war or some horrible thing that happened in some part of the world, or a movement of a community that's trying to like fight for its rights. So they'll get involved. And so I also got involved in all the different scenes of activism or whatever. And a lot of the groups that I worked with eventually started to focus on, anti-racism. At the time, we didn't have this identity politics and stuff. It was new. And I got involved in that. And then realizing that there was this like a lot of turnover in activism and it wasn't really leading to any real change. Sorry, I'm recovering from a flu. I started experimenting with this group that I was a part of in doing different kinds of interventions. So I'll give you an example. The group was called Artivistic. So art activism and whatever, academia. The name has not aged very well, but one of the things that we did, there was I don't know if you all remember the Bouchard-Taylor Commission on Reasonable Accommodation.
Oh my God, yeah, that's old, yeah.
It was old, yeah.
Like,
It seemed so alive at the time, but now it's so, even the name is so boring. That issue never got resolved. It eventually led to what now known as the Law 21, which is the law that basically the secularism law. So yeah, we definitely lost that battle. And my experience in organizing around that, basically, it was nice and it felt good to be working with people who were motivated to make a change. But I just felt like activists would come in and then they would leave town, and it was just this, that was never really leading to anything. We didn't have any resources. So I started experimenting with like art. Yeah, so one of the things that we did is at the time I was living in Park X, still live there. And we went around in the parks, picked up a bunch of kids who didn't have anything to do. They didn't have any structured activity. And we said, do you want to learn how to make a movie? And some of them were keen on it. They weren't doing anything. So we went to talk to their parents, and we asked their parents, like, would you mind if, if your kid did this thing with us every Saturday for 2 months? And so we basically gave them political indoctrination for 1 month. So workshops on, the immigration system, and because a lot of them were like, had issues with their status, or they had immigrated themselves, or their parents immigrated under, difficult circumstances. So we wanted them to be a little bit more aware of like, okay, you're not alone. This is something that is systemic, we taught them about, yeah, just like the issues. So like all the isms and then we followed those workshops with technical workshops. So we gave them a videography workshop, an editing workshop, screenwriting workshop, and then we showed them examples of different kinds of works that they might be interested in doing. They ended up doing and of course we weren't into it, but it's their choice. They ended up doing a version of Romeo and Juliet where the dad of Juliet hates Romeo because he's an immigrant and calls the whatever deportation on him. And it was very close to the writer of the story because her dad had been deported. And then you know, they edited the thing and we showed the film downtown at the NFB, and half of these kids had never left the neighborhood. And they saw their faces, their work in this official place with all this audience, you know? And so I felt like the impact that we had with that project was far greater than, you know, going to the Palais des Congrès and breaking through the barriers and like making noise and you know, what the hell did that lead to? You know, nothing. So not to say that it's activism, direct action is not important, but I think that we have to have a holistic view of like, okay, what is the movement? And yeah, so then I got a little bit into that, but the problem with that kind of intervention is there's no money. And of course, it doesn't change policy or anything. It just empowers, you know, individuals. At that time, I was working in a community center, community organization called Project Genesis. I don't know if anybody knows Project Genesis. Project Genesis is in Côte-des-Neiges. They have a storefront where you can walk in and get help, like filling out forms and stuff. You'd be surprised. The main barriers is people just don't know how to do I can't do red tape. Imagine people who barely can speak the language, right? So they had a bunch of lawyers there that also help people with their landlords, with access to healthcare, because at the time, and I think it might still be the case, immigrants didn't have access to healthcare for 6 months. So they would get indebted and it would be a whole thing. And then upstairs, there were community organizers. So I worked as the community organizers and we were always trying to do stuff, but what we could do was dependent on the funding. And the funding came from the CJA and United Way and a couple of other things and the government. And so our executive director was like, okay, we're going to work on this. And we were like, well, we don't really want to work on this. And the director was like, well, this is what we have the funding for. So obviously, as in every community organization, you're always detouring funds and being funny with like how you do programming and you try to skim off the top, obviously. But that's not a sustainable model for doing social change, and it's not scalable. And I realized that at the time, like you have this whole environment of social change is made up of activists who are pointing at the problems, the most egregious problems, and they don't have resources to properly communicate their analysis. It easily gets appropriated and sort of like misappropriated by the mainstream media. Then you have people who work in social work, artistic interventions, youth programming, just like support workers. And if they're funded by the government, they're very, like, no offense to the social workers, but it's like, it's garbage. Like it's, well, they're just overworked, really overstressed, and they're not able to offer a good service to most of their clients. That's just the reality. It's like when you go to a hospital. I was just at the hospital this morning, and if the person is being cared for doesn't have visitors, that person will get less good care. There's no way around it. So social work is similar. So anyway, so there's no money there. And in the community sector, the programming is really determined by the funders and their perspective. So I'm like, there's not enough money. And okay, so you could maybe create a new organization. People come up to me all the time saying, we want to create an organization. Well, how did you do it? And I'm like, don't create another organization, please. What are you going to do? And they're like, we're going to apply for grants. And I'm like, okay, but you applying for a grant is not going to create new money. If you're good at applying for grants, you're going to win a contract over another worthwhile endeavor. And it sucks. So every time we get a grant, I actually don't feel good about it because I'm like, well, who did we win this against? It's just other people doing work like us. So I really wanted to get out of all that. And I'm like, leading up to housing, all right? Sorry for just wanted to set the scene a little bit. My main concern really was always, how do we grow the movement? Because I really feel like the different issues that are important to us, all of us in this very diverse movement, they're all interconnected. And a lot of different communities are affected differently by similar forces that we can just broadly, without going too much into like reification, name like capitalism and colonialism and heteronormativity and sexism, whatever you would call all those things. So how do we grow the pie, and then how do we work together? So I have been focusing a lot on how do we grow the pie. I'm going to leave the working together for my 50s. That's a big one. That's a political problem. But so how do you grow the pie? So we're still not at housing. So then I was like, well, I'm going to create my own organization, making the same mistake that a lot of people do, that approach me about creating new organizations. But I said, I'm not going to take money from government. I have taken money from government. And I'm not going to take money from foundations. I have taken money from foundations. But it's temporary. And I'm going to try to find a way to create an autonomous organization that could set its own agenda and that will not be bound by issues. That's not going to be, well, we exist as an organization because we serve LGBTQ migrants, but we don't work with migrants that were rejected their asylum in the refugee claim because that's another organization that does it. Like, I work with these people. Like, they're upstairs from Brique by Brique, from our center. But I really wanted to get out of this like endless cycle. And so I started thinking about how we could do this. And I was at the Anarchist Book Fair, and I was going to a workshop, and I was surrounded by like punks, basically. At the time, that was the big thing, punks. But punks will never die. It's true. It's true. But then I was like, the Anarchist Book Fair is so accessible, bring people from all classes, and I started to meet these people, and I met one person who came from San Francisco. I'm like, how the hell did you get here? And I was expecting him to say, well, I hitchhiked. It was like, oh no, I took a direct flight from whatever. And I was like, what? It's like $1,200. I don't have that kind of money. And I realized that our movement, and then also getting into the anti-gentrification, movement, like meaning it all kinds of getting deep into, like groups that are fighting gentrification. I realized that most tenants in my neighborhood have never even used that term. They don't know what the word is. Most people who use the term learned about it in college. So our social movements are very, they're very diverse. And they're not just diverse in terms of like where people are from or like what their lived experience is, or their languages or whatever, but really also in terms of class. And I think it's like at the time, I don't know now, but at the time it was this kind of like secret, this like dirty secret that the social justice movement is a grassroots movement of people who are taking back their rights. But really, it's a vanguardist movement of middle-class people that are emotionally affected by the real suffering of other people. And that's okay. You know what I mean? That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. That's a really good thing. Let's not get into all that. Let's not get into all that jazz, but there's all kinds of existential. So I was like, well, these people have a problem. And they probably are going to inherit large amounts of money. And in fact, we are living now, just now, the largest transfer of wealth in human history between the wealthiest cohort ever, the baby boomers, to the Gen Xers and millennials. And these are, I'm not saying like, and the millennials didn't have the same opportunities as their parents. So obviously they struggled. They got very educated. They tried really hard and they're like barely making it. But they are going to, and they are now having much more resources. And I thought, well, we should be pooling our resources. If the Black Panthers can get really poor people to pool their resources, I think that we can pool some of our resources together. So I started playing with this idea. Again, we're still not at housing. And I was like, we're going to pool resources and then we're going to create autonomous infrastructure. There's no funder that's going to tell us what we're going to do. If we want to do artistic projects with kids without like the amount of paperwork, if we were to be funded by the government, there's no way they would allow us to approach children in the park. We have no permits for this, you know? They would never allow us to offer like a daycare services out of our community center, which like is so dangerous. Like there's so many dangers. But we had to be agile. We had to like, it was an emergency. Like the women in the neighborhood couldn't leave their homes. And we have activists, mobilizing to say, you cannot exclude non-status women from having access to daycares. So they're pushing, but in the meantime, what are they doing with their kids? So in a context where 85% of asylum seekers in our neighborhood are rejected, the average is 30% in the country. So there's a problem in our neighborhood. One of the factors must be that they can't even go get the damn papers because the kid. So thankfully, we didn't have funding for the daycare. We had our own money for the daycare. And we had our own money because we weren't, we owned our property and we were getting rental income. We were able to rent the space out. We had our own cash money that we were not accountable to. So I was like anyway, so as I don't know, we're gonna build our own stuff. And then I had some conversations with people who did have money. And they were like, that's a really good idea, but take it from me. My kind of people are not going to give you money for something that says really vague, like we're going to do infrastructure for social change. You don't have a track record. Who's going to give you money? So you need to put the money in a safe place. And where you put the money, it has to like be impactful. It has to be something that people believe in. And we were in the middle of the first real housing crisis in Park X. We had housing crises before, but they were salubrité crises. They were like bad conditions, really bad conditions. but people weren't getting kicked out. Park X was not a place people wanted to live. It was a sinkhole. So, but it was changing. So the campus had been announced. The university built a campus there. Milex, so the Quebec government transferred its main corporate subsidy from aerospace to artificial intelligence, which is such a lucky bet because AI exploded. So good on the Quebec government for that. Well, whatever. And my land was like saturated, and Villeray was starting to become an option for the FFF, you know? So basically there was pressure now in Park X. And we started to see cool cats coming in. A couple of Anglos are buying duplexes because it's impossible. They want quality of life. They don't care if they're a little further up.
In what year?
4
years ago, finished building the.
Yeah, but this was 2015, 2012. So 2012 was a huge real estate explosion in the city. I still don't understand why, but if you look at the charts, it's like boom.
So the people stopped investing in Toronto, and they said Montreal started looking like a good investment. They were no longer scared of the politics here.
Whatever it may be.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
When Vancouver, Toronto, and then came this way, it was cheaper.
Wave. There was a whistle. There's all this stuff about capital, which I can get into later. We can talk about later. God, I wanted to have a conversation. I'm already halfway through. We're getting there. We are almost at housing, and now we're about to get to housing. So the people I was talking to, yes,
Before you move on, what's FFF?
French from France. Yeah. So it's a thing. It's a thing. Yeah. But it's wrong of me to say this in an Anglophone institution. I do say it to them also. Yes, I'm not gonna say this other thing. All right. So, so then they were, and then I was like, well, why don't we just build our infrastructure around housing? Because the landlords are making money. We could be securing affordable housing, never kick people out, and the money they would have paid the landlord, we would use to do community organizing, which is brilliant if you don't know anything about real estate or business. And I didn't at the time. So I really goofed, but I was able to convince people because they don't know either. So a bunch of people gave me money and we started shopping. And we started losing a lot of bids in the neighborhood. The prices we came in literally. If we had come in just 1 or 2 years earlier, we would have bought. The way we had our financial projections was that with the money we were amassing, we would be able to afford a 20-unit property. I was losing the bids. I didn't know what I was doing. Eventually, I got into real estate. I learned stuff. I did a degree, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, and I was scared, so it's a lot of money and it's not mine, And so I was in real estate. When there's a boom, you cannot hesitate. You have to just boom, just go in there. So we lost bids, and the what we could afford started to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Just like I said, when you're buying a residential property, you start shopping at first, start losing your bids because you're like, I don't want to overbid. This is crazy, this price is crazy, whatever, but then you lose. And then you start compromising. You're like, okay, maybe I'll stay in a different neighborhood. And okay, fine, we'll get it. We don't need a third, we don't need an office. And it's get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we did the same thing. And eventually we gave up, literally. By that time I had learned more and I had a realtor license. I was looking at a property with some clients. And also we got very busy because all the talk, basically, even though we didn't raise enough money to do what we wanted to do and we got priced out, we built another form of equity that's not cash, which was kind of a social equity. And that social equity made it so that when we talked about a project or an opportunity, the city started to be forced to listen to us because we started getting in the newspaper and stuff like that. I think that's the story. Maybe we just got lucky. And eventually we convinced different stakeholders to sell us this factory, this paint factory. And then we got busy working on that because it's just, we're working with the government. So it was such a slog, you know. And finally, now, Monday, we're going to sign the papers for the transfer of deeds. We raised, you know, the $10 million for that. And it's all done. All the contract, everything is done. They're going to start building it in a couple months. But anyway, so we got busy with that thing. And so we were like, wow, we're doing this housing project. What are we going to do with 300K? Like, it's nothing. So it just sat there, and I visited this duplex with some clients, and it was badly marketed. It was marketed as a residential, and it turns out to be a commercial kitchen. So I was like, this could be a nice community center because the government didn't allow us to put a community center in our building. Our whole model is like, we're a little bit different. So in the housing sector, finally, I'm talking about housing. So housing sector, there are groups that work with tenants and that focus on, well, I don't want to step too much because Quinn, you're going to talk about this. Basically, there's groups that work with tenants and that empower tenants so that they defend their rights, because there are laws, you know, and you know, the more friction you can create for a landlord, the more leverage you have, the more you can come up with a better situation, whatever. Most people, they when landlords tell them to leave, they're like, well, we have to go. Like, what are you talking about? You don't have to go. So that's those groups. And then those groups double as lobbyists because they see the worst. I mean, they're the front line. So they're the ones that push the government. But when you have a government like the CAC pushing the government, it's like pushing a boulder, a brick wall. Like, it's, if you want to suffer, that's what you do. All right. And I don't want to suffer anymore. So then the other groups are developers. Developers tout themselves. See, I'm a bit bitter about developers. I'm talking about nonprofit developers. They tout themselves as being amazing because they create housing. But actually, they don't create housing. They're just technicians. When there's a contract, when there's a pie of the government of housing pie. It's a tiny little pie.
But they don't respect us.
Which, yeah, they don't, yeah. So that pie is getting smaller and smaller. And then there's all these vulture-like developers that are like, I want this piece of pie. I want this piece of pie. I want this piece of pie. And then the community groups, they basically feed them the projects. And the projects that are the most viable, in other words, that are the biggest, because the bigger a project, the lower the cost per unit for construction. And then the more viable it is because the government only gives you peanuts for buildings. So if they give you peanuts and you have a small lot, you can't make it work. And the government's like, get out of here. So I'm going too much into detail here, but we're a little bit different. We want to build. So we are builders, but we don't want to build by using government funds unless the government is going to add funds to the pie. Otherwise, what's the point? Those units are going to get built anyway. So we want to build outside of the subsidy system. So actually, we don't do social housing. Social housing technically means government funded housing. And then community housing is, but anyway, this is all semantics. So we're like, no, we're going to build more housing. All right, so that means that our competitor is the private developer. Basically, we want to do the same thing that a private developer does. So Broccolini is doing this building on Guy. It's huge. There used to be a parking lot. Now, the reason why they're So how do they do it? So that's where I got into. I was like, well, how do these people do it? The way that it works is when there's a lot that's available, that's up for sale, or if you can convince someone to sell you the lot's value is determined by essentially 10% of the whole cost of building the project and marketing it. But the caveat is that the market for these buildings that developers are building, they're either luxury rental or high-end rental or condo. That's what they do. You would never like how do you say it? I don't know how to explain it, but anyway, the point is that we're competing with the developers that are willing to pay a certain price for land and a certain price for construction, for materials and labor, expecting a certain price for their unit, right? So if that price for a 4.5 is $400,000 or $500,000 or $600,000, then they're sometimes able to make it work if the project is large enough. So if you want to buy a $400,000 or $500,000 building, right? And you can afford to put, say, 20% down or whatever, what would your mortgage be? Your mortgage would be like $2,500 a month. About. So now you want to build for people who can afford to put a down payment, so you can't sell it to them, right? So they're tenants. And you have to pay the down payment for them. And you have to subsidize their rent to an extent where the price of their rent is affordable. So they'll pay maybe $700 or $800. Right now, the median, basically for a unit to be considered to be affordable, this is not social. Affordable is 85% of median. So for 4.5, that's like $900. So if you want to build affordable housing, not even social housing. Social housing is 25% of your income. So if your income is social welfare and you make $600, you pay $200 for your. So we're not even talking about $200. Okay, let's just say $900. I know I'm losing some of you, but bear with me. You have to find a way to make up for the spread.
Not right now for 4.5.
Huh?
1,500 for 4.5 right now. Much better.
Whatever it is, if you're building housing for low-income people, you have to be able to either build the housing with way less money than the developer, which is impossible. The developers they're just, I don't know how to explain this, but not that they're not nice. They're gonna try to do it as cheaply as possible. So you're not gonna be able to beat them. You know, it's tough. It's tough. Me, I can't see myself being better than a developer.
Are you guys able to do it Habitat for Humanity style?
That's a separate thing.
Yeah.
We can talk about that later. So how do you do it? How do you do it? The only way to do it, I mean, that I've thought of, is to have way more of a down payment. So if you put way more of a down payment, then your bank loan is lower, so your debt is lower, so the cost of operating is lower, so you can actually give cheaper housing. So now the question is, and it's a great time to open it up a bit, is where do you come up with that money?
The banks give it to you?
No, that's the problem, is
Don't they owe us some money, the banks themselves?
They don't owe us anything.
I know, but they're like
Colonizing us.
I know, because the bank is a pièce populaire, it can pay some of this money.
But you're cheating because you work with it. So what Assad said is community bonds.
Community bonds. Community
All right,
bonds.
community bonds is just another thing, but you can raise money through donations. But obviously, people are not gonna donate like their life savings, you know, for housing. There are a lot of other issues, important issues. So what we're doing is we're basically borrowing money from ordinary people. We're asking them to take some of the money that they have in their savings account or in their RRSPs. How many people here have RRSPs? Very popular product. How many people have a savings account? How many people have RESPs? Okay, fine. People don't have children. How many people have TFSAs? Damn, some rich people here.
Yeah, that's safer.
Yeah. Damn. Okay. And how many people do own kind of like do their own investing, at least partially? Like they buy stocks of something or something. Right. Is it just out of curiosity, not the specific thing, but what is the kind of, is it a stock or a bond or I guess what else do they have here?
Please let it not be a REIT.
Bond in the Kensington market.
Okay, you bought a community bond. Who else has a community bond in here?
Have a socially responsible investment. Part of my TFSAs are in the socially responsible
That's
TFSA
right.
thing.
That's right. Yeah. So most of those are equities and also fixed incomes like bonds. So yeah, so you've got money in the market. Actually, anybody who has an RSP has money in the market.
Yeah.
So basically, what the sort of argument and what we're trying to get people to think about is that the developers that are destroying, or the REITs, for example, that are, in fact, REITs are ESG, so you may own a REIT. Everybody else who has RSPs owns REITs. If you own an RSP in Canada, you own a REIT. So the real estate investment trusts are giant companies that own lots and lots and lots of revenue property, and they tokenize those properties. And they hire property managers to make sure that they're getting as high a rent as possible from everyone. So the evictions are largely being conducted not by landlords, not like mom and pop landlords, but by management companies that are management on behalf of real estate investment trusts. A REIT, by the way, is not inherently a bad thing, like a corporation is not inherently a bad thing. They just happen to all be bad, but eventually I would like to transform into a REIT, huh?
Well, the BlackRock just came out, all the stuff about all the investment, like all the Vanguard bonds owned by the two I forgot BlackRock and Blackstone, and all the way they they just buy out all neighborhood.
Yeah, that's right.
And they've been buying out all neighborhood,
right.
and pretty much
right.
everybody's invested in them.
Yeah.
All RSPs are in
Totally.
these venture capitalists that buy out a whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
By just buying one after another.
Yeah. And then they
yeah.
squeeze it.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get people to think about the issue more as connected to finance, because the thing about housing, unlike a lot of other issues, the resources that are required to do housing, more social housing, it's equivalent to the resources that are required to do housing over 35 years, because that's the length of a residential commercial mortgage. So the same equivalent housing impact you want this year, if you want to build something, versus say like an environmental impact or some other social justice impact, I know it's disgusting to talk about it this way, is way more expensive. It's just housing is so expensive. It's maybe not, anyway, so let's not even get into it, but, and I think Quinn will talk a little bit more about like why housing, because housing is like, well, why, who cares, right? But I think I don't need to convince you all about that. But so what we're trying to do is get people to like take some of their resources and to pool it into a fund that would do good stuff instead. But then you have to come up with a solution for paying people back. And the way that you pay people back is by obviously adding value to your property. But if you cannot add value to your property by increasing the rents, how do you add value to your property? And that's where we're trying to innovate. So a housing project for us is not a service. We are not delivering a good to a like a needy person. All right. We haven't gone into, we haven't been a community organization funded by the nonprofit industrial complex long enough that we're basically becoming like this kind of like charity, sclerosic charity that like sees its people as like sad people in need. Actually, we really believe that our local residents and diverse residents all over the city have the key. They are most connected to their ancestors. They are most connected to their culture. They are most connected to the land. And they've come to a world that is very disconnected, and a world that's way more privileged. And so we see the people who invest in our projects, who donate in us, and who volunteer as people who have the problem, no offense to them. And the people that we support and help or whatever, our beneficiaries, as the people with the solution. So how do we activate that? How do we turn that value? First of all, how do we valorize it, which is very important. And then how do we turn that into cash flow? And so that's why our housing projects are always connected to a community center. They're not two separate things. For us, you cannot have a house, and our housing projects, the way we do our selection, we're working on it now. We don't say, okay, well, you're poor, and then you're poor, and then you're poor, so then the three of you get housing. We say, okay, well, here's all the people who are eligible because they're excluded from the housing market because of their income. Now, what is your relationship to each other? We want to make sure that we have community organizers living in our buildings. We want to make sure that they're that we don't just have, we don't segregate our buildings. We don't have, okay, we only have a building for people who are on the brink of like homelessness. We only have a building for asylum seekers. We're trying to create communities where people can start doing things together, creating value, which brings us to the community center. So even though we focus, our main mission is housing, we're able to add value to our housing projects through our community work. And so our community work is largely focused on cultural self-expression, because we believe that when people feel like they belong, like that their language is valuable and that their way of being is valuable and that they're not imposters in this country, that they will then demand better services, that they will stand up to their landlords, that they will question the doctor or the police officer or the social worker. And so then you don't need, you're actually saving on social service. You're basically, just by doing a little bit of cultural programming, you're having the equivalent impact as if you had invested in many social workers. And that's our angle. And then when people then feel like, okay, well, I'm part of this community, I want to give back, then we have a structure for that. So we have a time bank, we have all kinds of different programming, and we're working now on, we prototyped this with this duplex, and now we want to, it's working, so we want to scale up. And in commercial real estate, now I'm going to stop. In commercial real estate, the price per square foot goes down as your size of your thing goes up. So we're looking to move our tiny community's laboratory, cultural laboratory, to a much larger space. We want to move from we're looking at buildings that are 160,000 square feet. We're looking at buildings that are 10, 20,000 square feet. So we're really exploding. And so in order to do that, we're raising the community bonds. And if we're able to do at a larger scale with the community work at a larger scale, we will be able to free up enough cash flow to subsidize the rents, which would allow us to build housing that's not dependent on the government, it's extra housing, and that is competitive with the private sector. Because if you don't compete with the private sector, you'll never get anything. Like you just won't work. So that's, in a nutshell, what we're trying to do. Okay, bring it on.
I have so many questions. So I have a question because I think there's lots of, you're talking about that exchange. And I think there's lots of people who don't want their housing to go into this cycle of privatization and whatnot. And I don't know how, and this is where the land trust questions are coming up. And one of the questions I had is how do land trusts work? Where do you get them? Because I'm also seeing all these churches. And to me, I'm like, well, the churches shouldn't go, like I'm seeing barred up churches all over the city. Every time I see them, I get this fear of it going to private development. I'm like, that is a community center. That was always a community center and that should never go, should stay within the community. And how do we keep them? So I don't know how, because you sound like you're a private organization, but I'm trying to understand how land trusts or a nonprofit organization.
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand how land trusts work and how that would work to get these
We're
churches.
going to talk about land trusts.
Yeah.
Quinn is working on a land trust.
Okay, cool.
And yeah, if we had more time,
Yeah.
then we would have a fight about that in front of you.
Okay.
But yeah, land trusts are definitely thumbs up.
Leaving with the last word.
Exactly, that's thumbs up. So yeah, and then for the churches, check out Trinity Centers Foundation.
Okay.
They did the St. Jack's over here.
Right.
They're great. Their director is doing great work and they're trying to eat up all the churches. They're creating a brokerage that specializes in soliciting sales from denominations. So Trinity Centers Foundation.
In terms of like originally kind of yours, how I guess Brique to Brique came to be was like this driving motivator to not take away, let's say, funding from other organizations already working to advocate, let's say, for like unhoused neighbors, and coming down to like, okay, well, how do we grow this pie? So if I understood your solution, it's kind of in the short term borrowing from like middle class people who have enough to put in savings, but then in the long term, it enables you to actually compete with the private sector that has most of the money.
They also borrow. Actually, real estate is all debt. But yeah, the idea is to borrow money, which sounds kind of like, where is this going? But that's just kind of like, that's how it goes. Eventually, so REITs, they do it differently. They issue equity. They're like at the top of the top. They don't have to pay back the money. They're just like, you buy a share, and if you want to sell it later, you sell it to somebody else. But don't look at me. Once you buy me, I'm gone. But yeah, we do have to obviously like buy back our bonds, which we're doing. The impact that we're having is so great that many people donate their bonds. And I think a lot of people who invest in Brique by Brique, they wish they could give that money, but they have to be careful. So I think in their minds, I know for some of them, they're like, I'm going to lend it to you. And in 5 years, when you owe me the money, if I'm good, I'll give it to you. Otherwise, yeah, you'll pay me back, but you will have used it to do great work. Yeah.
And those people that you're borrowing from, do they like, do they live in, will they live in those spaces?
Oh, no. The people who live in our projects are super poor. You know what? 3 years ago, we did a survey to see like what services we could charge for, because we just didn't have enough funding and we were offering all these different things. And we looked at how much people were spending on rent and on food and everything. And we realized that on average, local residents, adults, had $75 to their name after housing, food, the basics. That's their allowance, their kitty. So no, they're not. I would actually like for them. Well, I won't get into details, but I think we're gonna have a product for lower income people It'll be like a savings bond. And it'll have no minimum. And I think it'll just give folks just a sense that they're participating. But that's to be determined.
I guess I was just wondering what your target market was and that kind of thing.
I have a word for that, and it's mainstream progressives. That's what I'm trying to get. And they're mostly millennials. If you want to know, so the demographic for our community bond holders, they're mostly millennials. They're mostly white. They're about 50. Yeah, I would say in terms of identification, gender identification, it's like 50-50. A lot of queer people. I think that we are able to hit a lot of like sexual gender minorities because I think they just I think that they have an experience of exclusion and they're not necessarily low class, So yeah, I mean, but it depends. I mean, that was our bond issues was in 2018. So we're gonna do another bond issue now, 6 years later or whatever. So the market probably has shifted a lot. There's way more people who know what this is. I had to explain what it was. Now it's much more common.
Are you concerned? Because when I'm listening to you, you're always talking about the market. It's very capitalistic. Like the whole
Yeah.
setup is like very entrenched in
Yeah.
capitalism. Do you have a concern that the capitalistic speak, the capitalistic framework is going to at some point corrupt the project?
I do have that concern. And I think that it's a constant struggle because you're playing with fire.
It's your
That being said, a lot of my partner's a dancer, yeah, I hang out with a lot of artists and stuff, and artists don't talk about art. They talk about money. And the very, very few times that, I've been surrounded by very wealthy people, they don't talk about money. They talk about art. So, I mean, at a certain point, we have to put aside our pride, take risks, and learn. Take stock of the what's impacting us so much, But if you're asking me whether if I succeed, if I'm gonna buy a luxury car, I would say yeah, 100%. I got my eye on this Lexus. Yeah.
I guess maybe on the same train of thought, have you ever considered making it a co-op?
So a co-op is a form of governance that could be nonprofit or for-profit. So, and that form of governance is defined in Quebec as each member has a vote. So there are all kinds of different co-ops. You have solidarity co-ops, you have workers co-ops, you have consumer co-ops like the Frigo Vert, where I used to work. That was consumer co-op back in the day. And then you have housing co-ops. And in the theory of a housing co-op is fantastic. Now, unfortunately, governments don't really want to fund co-ops because they tend to fail. It's not a published policy. I know from the inside. If you're gonna do a co-op, you're probably gonna have a hard time finding money for that, unless you give a contract to a property manager. In fact, we were forced to give a contract to a property manager in order to get the land for our project. The government doesn't trust people, residents. So I think there's a big challenge there. There's another challenge. And that challenge is when democracy is like, what did Winston Churchill say? It was like the worst of the best or whatever. The point I'm trying to make is, I'm not even going to talk about the theory. I'm going to tell you, in Park X, I think we have 3 or 4 co-ops. And then we have a bunch of nonprofit owned and operated social housing projects. The nonprofit projects reflect the diversity of the population. Co-ops are overwhelmingly white. And the reason for that is not because there's someone that's saying that this is for white people. But what it is I applied for a co-op for my mom and she didn't get in because you have to convince the committee, selection committee, that you, and the word is all these French words of like solidarity and cooperation, and they want you to be able to do stuff. So they're like, do you have accounting skills? Do you have da? And I'm like, listen, what are you talking about? Low income people, there's a reason why they're low income. It's because they don't have jobs, and they don't have jobs because they don't have qualifications. So I'm sorry if I sound a little bit like angry or whatever, but I am sad about co-ops because I was down with co-ops, but now I'm like, you would have to work very hard on governance and have principles for your selection committee, and they would have to be accountable to that constitution, not to just their feelings, you know. Unfortunately, democracy reflects the biases of people, as we can see in the United States. So, or you know, wherever, everywhere in democracies, but I mean, pressingly now in the week. So yeah, try to make co-ops better. Give me more. I have 5 minutes. Even be feelings.
How does your value creation with the cultural programming at your community center translate to the monetary benefit you want to give to your investor or your
I thought I had slipped a fast one on these people, and then you come and ask me the one question I don't have an answer for. Oh Lord. Okay, there are some answers. So right now we have a demand. I keep getting calls. The community groups want to rent commercial space from us for 3 reasons. One, they like us. 2, why do they like us? Because we're doing great, authentic work. We're not doing service provision. When we feed people, we don't show lineups. No offense to the food banks, okay? They're doing great work, but that's not what we do. When we feed people, we feed them with dignity. What did you do with the pop-up? It was beautiful. People, the food was good, but the environment and the context and the people, and there was so much care put into feeding people. That's how we do it. And then, so other organizations see that, they're like, oh my God, I want to be close to that. And that translates to willing to pay a higher rent. They also want to be close to each other. So organizations love synergy. It also saves them a lot of money because when you're doing outreach, it's a lot easier to do outreach if you're sharing a space with other organizations that also attract a clientele. That's the whole idea with the shift, the hub, and all these things. And we can see it works. And the other thing is, we don't just offer office space, we also offer activity space. And in the private sector, you don't really have that. If you want an activity space, you have to rent it for yourself. So there's a kind of WeWork aspect to it. And so that means that our community organizations, and I don't want to sound like I'm exploiting community organizations, but they're going to be paying market or more somewhere else. So we're getting market rate commercial rents from community organizations. We give free space to underfunded grassroots groups for sure. But like Agir upstairs, they have 3 times more funding than us. So I squeeze them. I mean, I really squeeze them. And so the great work that we do attracts people. And so those people that can afford to pay, we overcharge. The doctors in the neighborhood, they use our space to have their meetings. I charge them like $300 an hour. I mean, it's outrageous, and they pay. So I'm very happy about that because there is something in me that right. Targeted greediness, you know, surgical.
An hour, that is market price, $300 an hour for an office space, rental space. So
Yeah.
it's what you paid WeWork. Give from the doctors, it's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Following that note, I kind of have a question about a model, like, I'm thinking about in Vancouver, there's the James Black Gallery, and they do a lot of cool stuff, but sometimes it's just a space.
Yeah.
And a lot of the way they stay running is they rent, or like they charge money for weddings and spaces like that. I know someone else and she has an apartment space in Edmonton. And I think there's 8 units, and what she does is she Airbnbs 2 of them, for like,
It subsidizes the other ones, yeah.
and subsidizes the other ones.
Yeah, so that's a mixed housing model. We can't do that with housing because it's a reputational risk.
That makes sense.
So then we lose a unit also. So I just do it with the commercial. But aside from the brick and mortar income, you know, I'm trying to develop some kind of online revenue stream. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to have rental subsidy subscriptions. So a lot of people who might be moving into the neighborhood or feel like, you know, their presence is maybe like making it hard for other people to live in the neighborhood, then they subscribe. So we have one subscriber, she pays $100 a month, just because she moved into the neighborhood. So we're maybe working with because the Cape, Amy from the Cape is the tenants' rights organization in the neighborhood. She's like, you should do a fund for asylum seekers because they are excluded from social housing. They don't have access to social housing. So we're working on something like that. And it's really about, I think the more we're able to show the positive impact and the community engagement and the social change and the dynamic work we're doing with people who are like marginalized, the more people I think want to engage with our products. And our community bonds, the return is very low. So we make a spread actually. So there's some bonds that we don't invest at all because they're too liquid. Because the way that you repay a bond is you refinance. When your property grows up in value, you go back to the bank and you say, look, my thing is worth more, and then you pay back the bondholders. But some of the bonds are only 1 year. So we don't touch that money. We offer 2%, and then we make a spread. So we invest that money and we make say 2 or 3%. So that
Actually,
is the cash flow.
anyways, I don't know if there's other people who have community bonds, but there's actually a trick the banks use to make more liquidity or less liquidity from community bonds, but.
Yeah.
I'm still concerned about your corruption issue. You didn't answer the check and balances about how you guys what are the check and balances in place to deal with that? You can't trust the government. They're not going, it's going to be the community.
The governance.
Governance, the governance.
There's a board. I mean, look,
There's the board of directors.
of course. Yeah. This is not like a startup,
Of
you know.
course.
Listen, it's all about style and having a good time. I tell my people all the time, like it's the journey. It's really the journey that counts. And yeah.
You can finish your thought though, if you want. I just have a question.
I want to be able to answer you in a way that really, you know what? I feel compelled to answer your question in a way that would really just reassure you and everyone. But the more I try, the more I realize is that there's always a risk. And if we don't take risks, we're not going to get anywhere. So I don't ask people to invest in us, to support us, because there's no risk. I'm asking them to take a risk on us. So yeah, I don't know. Amen. Sing. Yeah.
So I'm curious, in your opinion, if someone, say, from this room were to approach you after and be like, I am passionate about housing, how do I either get involved with Brique, or how would you recommend I get involved in the housing?
Okay, that's a great way to close my bit. I'm over 2 minutes. I'm so happy you asked that question because we fucking need help. We really need help. For real. I mean, Angie's already helped us a lot. But yeah, we do need a lot of help. Right now, I need a campaign support. I'm actually looking for a campaign manager. I'm hiring. But I'm also looking for all kinds of support. We're going to be doing so glad I'm getting to talk about this. Thank you. We're doing a telethon. Telethon.
Like an
Yeah, that's the reaction I'm looking.
guy like an Instagram or live feed,
Listen,
Twitter telephone.
this is my objective. I want Celine Dion to perform at our telethon. Right?
Yeah.
It goes back to having fun and stuff like that and trust.
People to get
Yeah, so the first step is we need help getting as many people to sign a petition and we will send to Celine Dion.
no people in the arts.
You are, what you're telling me is you're signing up.
You need to ask, yeah.
So look us up, send a line, info@ or faiz@brique.com. We're a small handful of people. You will get a person that responds to you. We'll call you and our team is we just work with the talent that comes in. We don't specifically look for certain things. So whatever your talent is, whatever you're good at, whatever you want to learn, you can do it with us. And it's really just about having a good time and upping your game with us. It's all about just having fun. So the next thing that you could volunteer for and help out is with the telethon. We're gonna need people to man the calls. We're gonna need people to get performers. We're gonna need people to just do all the work, that the set design and everything, the videography. We want to make this super fun and super funny because telethons are hilarious and they're an amazing way to sell product, because when you get a call from a telemarketer or whatever, you're like, fuck this. But if you know in advance that there's a telethon and the person says you're on the thing telethon, you're gonna first of all, you're gonna be like, whoa, I'm special. And also you're gonna be like, okay, ooh, I can't hang up. At least I have to engage. So I'm hoping it'll be effective. Yeah, the main thing is help us sell these damn bonds because we wanna grow. Yeah. That's it. C'est bon?
I know you have such a busy schedule, so we're really grateful that you could come hang out with us. And you have to go maybe, so.
I have a baby, I have a newborn, so I have to go and do the thing, yeah.
Okay, but we got 20 minutes of solid question and answer, so that was great. We have food now. You're welcome to share the food if you